October the 1st, 2025. Midnight. The clock struck 12 and the United States federal government ceased operations. Not from war, not from invasion, from paperwork. Congress couldn't sign a budget. And 1.4 million Americans who work for the government became collateral damage in a political cage match nobody asked for. Fast forward to today. 6 weeks later, we're living through the most catastrophic administrative collapse in modern American history, and the people bearing the weight aren't politicians. They're the men and women who signed up to serve, who took an oath, who put on the uniform, and now they're making decisions between keeping the lights on and putting food on the table. Norfolk, Virginia, home to the largest naval installation on planet Earth. October morning. Katie Frazier holds her child in her arms. She's waiting, not for deployment orders, not for training exercises, for vegetables and chicken at a mobile food distribution center. Her husband, Navy technician, working every day. Paycheck vanished into political gridlock. "I don't really understand why it keeps happening," she says. "Why we can't just keep the government up and running." The numbers paint a nightmare. Over 900,000 federal workers furloughed, another 2 million showing up to work, without compensation, Coast Guard personnel, Border Patrol agents, prison guards, FBI investigators, TSA screeners, air traffic controllers managing commercial jets with hundreds of souls on board, all of them clocking in, none of them getting paid. Should federal workers have walked off the job after week 1? Type A for yes, they should strike. Type B for no, essential services must continue. Here's where the absurdity reaches peak insanity. The Pentagon scrambled. They found funds, sort of. Picture someone raiding every couch cushion in the building. $2.5 billion yanked from housing allowance accounts. $1.4 billion stripped from weapons research programs. $1.3 billion diverted from naval construction budgets. Grand total, $5.3 billion. Enough to cover exactly one pay cycle. 1. That's like paying your mortgage with your retirement fund. Sure, it works today, but what about tomorrow? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on national television. His message? Crystal clear and terrifying. "We believe we can continue to pay the troops on Friday. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to pay everybody." Then came the kicker. "If the shutdown continues, we're not going to be able to pay the service members by mid-November." Translation: even the military pay is temporary. The clock is ticking. And when it hits zero, everyone stops getting paid. Everyone. But here's the plot twist that sounds like fiction, but isn't. A mystery benefactor stepped forward. Anonymous, wealthy, connected to Trump's inner circle. This person donated $130 million, specifically designated for military salaries during the shutdown. $130 million. From someone who won't identify themselves, to pay American troops because the American government can't. Democratic Senator Chris Coons from Delaware raised the obvious question. Using anonymous donations to fund our military raises troubling questions of whether our own troops are at risk of literally being bought and paid for by foreign powers. Foreign powers. Buying American military paychecks. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a legitimate concern when anonymous cash flows into Pentagon accounts during national crises. Budget experts examined the legal framework. The Pentagon's Gift Acceptance Authority permits donations for specific purposes. Military academies, veterans hospitals, memorial cemeteries, benefits for wounded warriors and families of fallen soldiers. But general salaries? That's not on the approved list. The administration pushed forward anyway. Rules, guidelines, legal precedent, all secondary to immediate political survival. If this were your military, would you accept anonymous funding? Share your thoughts in the comments. Meanwhile, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program became the epicenter of maximum chaos. SNAP feeds 42 million Americans. Monthly investment, $8 billion. Average household receives $356. Average individual gets $190. For military families already stretched thin, SNAP meant survival, not luxury. Survival. The Department of Agriculture had a plan, posted online before October 1st. Clear language. Multi-year contingency funds exist precisely for shutdowns. Congressional intent is evident that SNAP operations should continue, the document stated. These emergency reserves, designed specifically to maintain food assistance when appropriations lapse. The plan explicitly confirmed contingency accounts could fund participant benefits during mid-year lapses. November 1st arrived. SNAP benefits stopped. Completely. The USDA website received a makeover. New banner appeared. The well has run dry. Direct blame assigned to Senate Democrats. The shutdown plan mentioning those contingency funds, scrubbed from the website, deleted, as if it never existed. But the internet never forgets. Screenshots circulated. The previous guidance contradicted the current narrative entirely. 27 state attorneys. General filed emergency lawsuits. Massachusetts led the charge. Rhode Island joined. New York, California, Michigan, Pennsylvania. All demanding one thing: use the contingency funds. They exist for this exact scenario. Federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island agreed. Orders issued. Restore SNAP funding immediately. Use the emergency accounts. Deadline set for Friday. The Justice Department appealed, straight to the Supreme Court. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson issued a temporary stay. Not a ruling. Just a pause. Time for appeals courts to evaluate. Meanwhile, 42 million Americans entered limbo. Benefits frozen. Legal battles raging. Families waiting. President Trump addressed reporters on Air Force One. His analysis of SNAP recipients? When you look at SNAP, it's largely Democrats. They're hurting their own people. The statement lacks factual foundation. SNAP doesn't collect voter registration. The Agriculture Department's data tells a different story. Oklahoma, high SNAP participation. Louisiana, significant usage. West Virginia, major reliance. Alabama, substantial dependency. All red states. But facts became optional in shutdown messaging. This kind of comprehensive fact-checking requires serious investigative work. Subscribe so you never miss our evidence-based breakdowns of political theater versus documented reality. Food banks mobilized nationwide. The Armed Services YMCA recorded a 30% surge in assistance requests across every location. Killeen, Texas, home to Fort Hood. Requests jumped 34%. Kansas, one military-focused pantry registered a 300% traffic increase. 300%. That's not growth. That's catastrophic systemic failure translated into human suffering. Capital area. Food Bank in Washington, D.C. reported queues extending multiple blocks. Feeding America, chapters from coast to coast, prepared for unprecedented demand. Stronghold food pantry volunteers worked double shifts. Churches opened emergency distribution centers. Private citizens organized donation drives. America's charitable infrastructure strained under weight it wasn't designed to bear. Compare the timeline. The 2018-2019 shutdown lasted 35 days. Food bank demand increased significantly, but manageably. This shutdown? Day 40 and counting. Now the longest government funding lapse in recorded American history, surpassing every previous administrative collapse, and still no resolution visible on any horizon. Air traffic became the canary in the coal mine. Controllers deemed essential personnel, required to report, paid exactly $0. Managing departures and arrivals at America's busiest airports. Each shift, hundreds of aircraft. Each aircraft, hundreds of passengers. Lives depending on focus and precision from people wondering how to pay rent. The Federal Aviation Administration announced emergency measures. Traffic reductions at 40 major airports, starting at 4% cuts, ramping to 10% by November 14th. LaGuardia, Newark, Philadelphia, Reagan National, O'Hare, LAX, Atlanta, Dallas. Every major hub affected. Flights canceled. Thanksgiving travel plans destroyed. Economic ripple effects touching every sector. One air traffic controller issued a public warning. If the shutdown continues through Thanksgiving week, expect the worst day of travel in the history of flight. Not hyperbole, not exaggeration. Mathematical certainty. Reduced capacity plus peak demand equals systemic breakdown. Which failure hurts America more? Domestic impacts or international reputation damage? Drop your answer below. Germany became an unexpected chapter in this crisis. U.S. Army garrison Bavaria. American military families stationed overseas. The base website posted directives, lists of German charitable organizations, Essen für alle, food sharing AV, Tafel Deutschland, too good to go. American service members in Germany officially directed to German charity networks for food assistance. Screenshots captured the directives before they vanished, removed after media attention. But the evidence persisted. Russian state television seized the opportunity. Segments showcasing American military personnel in charity queues. Chinese propaganda outlets amplified every image, every video, every story. The declining empire cannot sustain its own defenders. The messaging landed globally. America's adversaries didn't create this crisis. They just documented it and weaponized it. Soft power erosion in real time. States scrambled to compensate for federal paralysis. Alaska diverted state funds to refill SNAP cards. Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs released $1.8 million in emergency aid. She acknowledged publicly it represented a drop in the bucket compared to actual need. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin announced the Virginia Emergency Nutrition Assistance Program. Maryland Governor Wes Moore allocated $62 million to maintain SNAP payments. State budgets attempting to fill federal voids. Unsustainable, temporary, inadequate. Head Start programs serving 58,600 children across 134 centers in 41 states faced imminent collapse. Grants expired November 1st. Early childhood education, nutritional support, health screenings, all threatened, not for budgetary reasons, for political leverage reasons. Toddlers became pawns in congressional chess matches. Credit unions serving military members launched emergency protocols. Navy Federal Credit Union extended $15 million in zero-interest loans. Pentagon Federal Credit Union approved hardship withdrawal procedures. But loans accumulate debt. Emergency withdrawals deplete savings. These aren't solutions. They're band-aids on arterial hemorrhaging. Eviction notices started arriving. 127 federal employees in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area received 30-day termination warnings from landlords. Mortgages entered foreclosure processes. American citizens serving their nation facing homelessness, not from enemy action, from friendly fire, from their own government's dysfunction. Inside Coast Guard facilities, conversation shifted. Officers openly discussed bankruptcy options during shift rotations. Enlisted personnel pooled resources, sharing meals, splitting costs. Group text messages circulated photos of empty refrigerators. family group chats strategizing about which bills to ignore. Morale didn't just decline, it collapsed. If you've stayed with us this deep into the analysis, you're our core audience. People who want documentation, not spin. Hit like, subscribe, and activate notifications. Your engagement directly funds our investigative journalism. Senate Majority Leader John Thune scheduled a rare Sunday session. November 8th, Day 40. No votes scheduled, just meetings, just discussions, just ongoing bipartisan conversations. Translation: more talk, zero action. Senator Gary Peters from Michigan declined to characterize negotiations. "We're in a pivotal moment," he offered. Pivotal moments don't feed families today. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer delivered floor speeches highlighting contradictions. $40 billion in loan guarantees to Argentina's president, but no money for hungry American children. $300 million for a White House ballroom renovation, but military families in food lines. $172 million for Transportation Secretary's luxury aircraft, but SNAP benefits suspended. The optics? Indefensible. Speaker Mike Johnson held repeated press conferences, his narrative consistent. Republicans want to reopen government. It's simple math. We need 60 Senate votes. Democrats refuse to provide them without Affordable Care Act subsidy extensions. Therefore, Democrats are responsible. The circular logic ignored one fundamental fact. Both sides control whether this ends. Both sides choose continuation. The Affordable Care Act subsidies became entangled in shutdown politics. These subsidies, extended by previous legislation, expire December 31st, 2025. Without extension, health insurance premiums explode. Vermont residents already received notices, some families facing $25,000 annual increases. The shutdown wasn't just about food and paychecks. It encompassed healthcare, social safety nets, fundamental questions about government obligations to citizens. President Trump repeatedly demanded Senate Republicans eliminate the filibuster. Terminate it, he urged. Senate GOP leadership declined. Insufficient votes within their own caucus. Trump's response? They're making a big mistake. Only a foolish person would be against that. The institutional guardrails held. Barely. Compare federal priorities. Argentina received $40 billion in financial support. American military families queued for charity meals. The contrast required no editorial commentary. The facts spoke volumes about administrative priorities and values. National parks shut down operations. Yosemite closed. Yellowstone reduced services. Grand Canyon limited access. The Gateway Arch in St. Louis closed, briefly reopened, then closed again. Smithsonian museums in Washington ceased public hours. America's cultural and natural heritage made inaccessible by political gridlock. The IRS furloughed nearly half its workforce. Tax filing season approaching. Refund processing delayed. Taxpayer assistance unavailable. Citizens owed money by their government, unable to collect because the government stopped functioning. Energy Department furloughed employees except security and safety oversight. Nuclear weapons transportation continued, but oversight diminished. Nevada reported over 1,000 nuclear contractors potentially receiving termination notices. Security implications obvious and alarming. Should this crisis force fundamental reforms? What changes would you demand? Comment your solutions. University students depending on federal aid faced uncertainty. 75,000 college and trade school students who are dependents or survivors of military members. Tuition payment systems disrupted. Some universities paused payment requirements. Others couldn't afford institutional charity. educational futures hanging in political balance. National school lunch program funding technically continued, but state agencies reported lacking reimbursement funds. Schools provided lunches. States paid schools. Federal reimbursement to states? Delayed or absent. Another temporary gap filler approaching limits. Transportation Security Administration screening continued. Agents working without pay. Security wait times expanded to 4 hours at major airports. Airlines lost $600 million from missed connections and cancellations. Economic damage radiating through entire aviation ecosystem. Bipartisan Policy Center estimated total federal civilian workforce impact. 1.4 million employees affected, roughly 700,000 furloughed. Another 700,000 working without pay. Lives disrupted, careers jeopardized, financial security obliterated. The legal battles intensified. Federal district courts ordered SNAP restoration. Supreme Court temporarily froze those orders. Appeals courts considering permanent injunctions. Legal processes grinding forward while families went hungry. Justice moves slowly. Hunger doesn't wait for appellate decisions. International allies observed with concern. If America treats its own military families this way, what does that signal about treaty commitments? About defense partnerships? About collective security agreements? The strategic implications extend far beyond domestic politics. Historical comparisons offered limited comfort. 20 funding gaps since 1976. Most lasted days. Only 3 exceeded 2 weeks before this one. All within the last 3 decades, each longer than the previous, each more damaging, each setting worse precedents. The breaking point approached, economic pressure mounting, travel chaos escalating, public outcry intensifying, political calculations shifting. Something would force resolution, eventually, but eventually remained undefined, and families needed resolution now. The precedent this shutdown establishes? Dangerous. If 40 days becomes acceptable, why not 60? Why not 90? If military pay depends on anonymous donors, why maintain appropriations processes? If SNAP suspension despite contingency funds becomes standard, why preserve those emergency reserves? Each broken norm makes the next crisis worse. Military retention will suffer long-term consequences. Recruitment numbers will decline. Why volunteer for service that treats you as expendable leverage in political games? Why risk your life for a system that stops your paycheck over partisan squabbles? The Volunteer Force Foundation erodes with each shutdown day. This deep dive investigative content requires extensive research and fact-checking. Subscribe, like, and share to support journalism that prioritizes truth over talking points. Some specific human stories cut through statistics. Vashti Bailey at Norfolk, Navy wife and veteran, waiting for food donations, planning for missed paychecks. Katie Frazier holding her child, not understanding why this keeps happening. Unnamed Coast Guard officers discussing bankruptcy. Unnamed military spouses picking up gig economy jobs between government service. These aren't data points. These are Americans. The mathematical certainty of cascading failure became undeniable. Federal workers stop spending in local economies. Small businesses lose customers. Tax revenues decline. State budgets strain. Municipal services reduce. The economic contagion spreads exponentially. Every shutdown day amplifies damage geometrically. Veterans organizations issued joint condemnations. The American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, AMVETS, unified voices declaring using service members as budget hostages represents fundamental betrayal of sacred trust. 15,000 letters flooded congressional offices first week alone. Pressure mounted but produced zero tangible results. November 8th arrived. Senate convened Sunday session. Rare weekend work. Symbolic gesture toward urgency. But symbols don't pay bills. Symbols don't buy groceries. Symbols don't restore dignity to families begging for charity food. Senator Thune promised senators would remain in session until government reopens. Duration undefined. Resolution pathway unclear. Agreement components still being negotiated. Bipartisan talks showing slight progress. Progress measured in glacial increments while families suffered acute crises. The minibus proposal emerged. Package of 3 full-year appropriations bills attached to continuing resolution for remaining agencies. Veterans Affairs. SNAP. Select other programs funded through fiscal year end. Everything else funded temporarily. When temporarily? To be determined. Maybe January. Maybe later. Democrats demanded health care subsidy extensions before any agreement. Republicans refused negotiations during shutdown conditions. Stalemate persisted. Neither side willing to move first. Both sides convinced of moral superiority. Both sides tolerating human cost as acceptable collateral. President Trump claimed via social media that Americans would receive $2,000 per person dividend from tariff revenues, excluding high-income individuals. No implementation details, no timeline, no legislative proposal, just a claim. Amid shutdown where his administration couldn't fund existing programs. The cognitive dissonance reached absurd levels, billions for foreign loans, but domestic food assistance suspended, hundreds of millions for luxury renovations and private jets, but military families depending on charity, promises of future dividends, but present-day paychecks suspended. When politicians prioritize everything except people, what does that reveal? Leave your assessment in the comments. The images from November 2025 will persist in collective memory. Uniformed personnel in food bank queues, military spouses carrying donated groceries, children of service members confused why favorite foods disappeared. These images define an era, not just of government dysfunction, but of societal values revealed through crisis response. Day 40 represented more than numerical milestone. It symbolized systemic failure at every level. Legislative failure to pass budget, executive failure to lead compromise, judicial system unable to force immediate relief, administrative failure to protect vulnerable populations, institutional failure to maintain basic social contract. The resolution, whenever it arrives, will include back pay provisions. Federal law guarantees eventual compensation, but eventual doesn't solve immediate crises. Eventual doesn't prevent evictions happening now. Eventual doesn't restore credit scores damaged this month. Eventual doesn't rebuild trust shattered today. Trust requires years to build, minutes to destroy, decades to rebuild. November 2025. Destroyed military family trust in government promises. That damage persists long after paychecks resume, long after SNAP restarts, long after shutdown formally ends. The fundamental question facing America: what does service mean? What value does society place on those who volunteer for potential sacrifice? What obligations does government owe its defenders? November 2025 answered those questions. The answers horrified anyone paying attention. 6 weeks without functioning government, longest shutdown in history, record still growing, no clear end visible, just ongoing political theater while real Americans suffer real consequences. This is democracy stress-tested to near breaking point. The results suggest urgent need for structural reforms before the next crisis breaks what remains. Subscribe and engage if you believe those who serve deserve better than becoming pawns in partisan warfare.